It's really, really awesome that you agreed to join us today. I'm really grateful. So thank you
Yeah,
for
you're
being
welcome.
here. Yeah, and your
Yeah,
hair
no,
looks awesome like that, by the way. I really like
thank
it.
you. Yeah, it's as a
Yeah.
style I saw scrolling on TikTok and I thought I'd try it.
Oh, really? Just pigtails? Or oh, you have it up in the
It's
back
like
too.
yeah, it's like a thing where you pull it back and then you have like another hair thing and then it goes through the first one and then you braid it.
Wow, that sounds really complex and something I wouldn't know how to do, but
I
Performing
think
the fuck out of that femininity, huh?
yeah, I've tried.
kind of wanted to just get into it because you have such incredible medical knowledge around this issue. And I really, really wanted to talk to you about the current fetish milk situation going on.
Yeah, that's quite a situation that we're in.
Right? I finally had the stones to talk about it today a little bit because I've just tried not to scream about it or just give up because it's just so disgusting.
Right. And so I to like backpedal a little bit that's a the fetish milk situation is where you have people who are male who had and you have three puberties, right? When they talk about puberty blockers, there's actually two other periods in your life before adolescence where you have the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal activation and you have elevated levels of sex hormones. And these are doing a lot to pattern your body for subsequent development because development builds on past development. So you have a period when you're in the womb where your sexual differentiation happens and you're exposed to these elevated levels. And then you have another period in infancy that can last from about, depending on your sex, it is for several months during infancy, is to as late as 2 years old. And then that's doing a lot to pattern your body and to create structural differences early in development that are then magnified later in development that allow you to produce healthy milk for an infant at the quantities an infant needs. Sometimes I see these men talking about how like they fed their child only breast milk for 6 weeks and it didn't lose any weight, so it's fine. But of course, infants are supposed to be gaining weight. They're not supposed to just not lose weight. So it's called failure to thrive. So it's quite shocking. So we're in a situation where they're using drugs to induce lactation in adults, males who had estrogen only, and estrogen is not the only sex hormone in a female that contributes to breast development. You know, you have a cyclical exposure to estrogen and progesterone and other hormones. So, but they've grown these um, pseudo breasts, I would call them, and then they're using drugs to then induce um, this sort of lactation in order to give them the experience of breastfeeding a baby. So it's very much centering the emotional needs and whims and desires of an adult male over the physiological needs of an infant.
Yeah. Do you have any idea of like potential outcomes for what this could do to a child besides it not gaining weight? Like, or because there's been some studies, but those studies even lean on why there might not be enough nutrition, but it's still important to basically validate the fetishist males that are doing
Right.
this.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like your camera froze on my end. Can you still see me? Okay, there we go.
Yeah, you're moving.
Um,
You froze for a hot second, but that's it.
okay. So the question was that whether
The
why it's more
outcome, like
important to
potential side
validate. Yeah.
effects.
So in addition to the many side effects of not getting the nutrition you need when you need it that early in life, there's bonding issues that happen because these men are motivated by a different goal than the mother would be, and are having a different developmental history that led them to this point. So you have to assume that there's going to be some impact on development there, psychosocial development of the infant. The fact that there's drugs that they're taking, some or all of them are going to be able to then transfer into the breast milk. And you know, your doses of a medication is scaled to your body weight, and infants are very small. So even a small amount transferred into breast milk can have a profound impact on them. And yeah, we obviously don't experiment on infants formally with this sort of protocol, so we don't actually know
Yeah,
all of
that's
the
true.
impacts it's going to have long term. But we know that these are drugs that are powerful enough to cause a man to start lactating. So you have to assume that it's going to have a significant impact on an infant, and just like their own mini puberty is having a significant impact on them.
And they
I
give
mean,
additional,
nursing
sorry, go ahead.
mothers. Sorry. Yeah, nursing mothers are told like not to avoid like a slew of things, like including like sushi and like foods that that are actually
Right.
quite healthful, but like potentially contain some, small, minute amounts of toxins. They're told certainly to stay away from alcohol, and I can't imagine like there's sort of like downstream metabolites of some of these pseudo hormones and whatever other recreational drugs that some of these
Right.
males are taking that I don't like. It doesn't seem like anybody's excuse me, too concerned. And this whole idea, like I'm outraged about how nursing mothers would be told about failure to thrive and would be absolutely held to account and would be just dragged across the coals. And I've known women who have weighed infants before and after feeding in order to make sure that the infant now contains a certain amount of like nutrients.
Right.
And like, but these males are being just validated all over, celebrated in the public sphere. And so I like,
And the
what do you
literature is full of doing this, where the goal was to induce lactation so that a male could partially feed an infant for a period of maybe a month before they decided even that was like too much. But so it's just like it is ever the people involved know that this is not centered on the infant. It's not in the best interest of the infant, and it's in the interests of a man who wants to have an experience and use an infant as a prop,
Yeah.
and that's just not good.
Do they have to give added, like do they just give more estrogen than what the trans-identified male might already be on to induce lactation, or is it?
No, it's not just estrogen. There's a class of drugs. I don't want to mispronounce it. It's like galactologs or something like that, of
Yeah, I
which
actually think
domperidone is an example, that they will give to them as along with mechanical stimulation in order to try to trigger the production of this galactorrhea. Um,
and what would you say to the, the criticism or the rebuttal that women have to induce lactation sometimes, like with the
well,
mechanical or with added, with supplements or supplemental hormones? Because that's what I see the most in retaliation to people being against moobs feeding infants.
right. So which seems like kind of like a fundamental appeal to fairness. But there's again that's centering it on the adult and the adult sense that they're being denied something that they want. Um, a woman, even if she has to use a mechanical device to initiate lactation, that's normal because we don't typically lactate prior to having a need to. It's not just something we do all the time. But we know that we had in utero exposures and early infancy exposures to these other hormones, and that patterned our breasts to produce these things. And we also know that we had a lack of exposure to male hormones. So that it's just incomparable. And
Yeah,
even with a woman, there might be some times where you would need too much of the drug to induce it for it to be safe. So just because women sometimes can do it safely doesn't even mean that women could always do it safely, much less that a male could ever do it safely.
that's a really, really good point. Yeah. So you have experience. I mean, I know that a lot of people know your story, but I'm not sure everyone will. And I kind of wanted to get into your own personal story and journey to becoming trans, and I guess how you decide, not the dysphoria aspect, but if you're dysphoria, do you think it's where you think your dysphoria stemmed from, and if it had anything to do with your past history of abuse, or if it's more about just that common occurrence where the child that then will grow up to be gay often experiences that dysphoric feeling for a time.
Mm-hmm. So I guess where my issues stem from. I mean, I had some difficulties growing up for a few reasons, but I'm also I just have a pervasive developmental disorder that is thought to be rooted in genetics and not. So it's like there's a nature nurture component. So while there were certainly events in my early childhood that were upsetting and beyond my control. There was also just the fact that I'm different, and so therefore my reaction to those events was different. Like there's a lot of good research I was posting about on the 4th of July that the people who go on to develop PTSD after a traumatic event, there's some evidence that they already had a tendency towards having exaggerated acoustic startle reflex, for instance. And so you have a
Really?
kind of a predisposition. Yeah. So it's like you have a vulnerability to having this specific kind of reaction, because not all traumatic reactions are PTSD. Not all traumatization is PTSD. Just because you had a traumatic experience and you were traumatized by it and you need to work through the trauma, it doesn't mean that you have PTSD. PTSD is a very specific symptom pattern that's a result of fundamental changes to how the brain is functioning that then become pervasive. So I know that that's true for me, is that I had a predisposition to having a strong reaction to traumas. I also had some unusual traumas in terms of like I had a significant injury when I was 2, for instance.
Oh,
That
really?
I remember. Yeah, I cut my foot
What
open pretty bad.
happened? Oh,
There was
okay.
a broken glass at a park, and so I remember the plot too. I was like, I could just, I bet I could put my foot in there. I wandered right over to it.
And you remember that from when you were 2, huh?
Yeah, I've got a lot of very early memories. That's definitely not my earliest memory, and so I remember that. I remember being carried to the home and then going to the hospital and needing a bunch of stitches. So, and then the recovery period. So it's just like, that had an effect on my nervous system, and that may have been one of the earlier triggers to it.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
And just experiences of the world's not safe now, and people don't get it, and people don't see what I'm going through, and being the pervasive developmental disorder diagnosis the Google says it's folded into autism in 2013. So now it's considered to be part of the autism spectrum. It wasn't when I was a kid and was getting treated for it. But now it is. So yeah, so that word entails a lot of social difficulties, which are upsetting and make you feel different and like you don't understand. And so that puts you at risk of finding it appealing and validating to hear that, well, maybe you don't understand because you're supposed to be different and doing different things. And if you just imagine that you're different and pretend to be doing different things, social world gets easier. But really, it's easier because you're older now. That's a big part of why it's easier when you're pretending to be something you're not. Yeah, I started identifying as a trans mask, they say, or as trans man, or as genderqueer at various times from about 2009, when I took a class that my friends and I joked was Judith Butler studies. It was called Advanced Feminist Theory at Cal, but it was like the professor decided to have us study books that were written by people in the gender and women's studies department that were inspired by Judith Butler and Foucault. So we also, I think, read some of Judith Butler's work too, which is just it's so frustrating to read her work, because it's almost rises to the level of self-harm to keep trying. It's just not well written.
Agree. I went through a similar program, and like, yeah, any kind of postmodernism at this point just triggers my like almost like gag reflex for the nonsense that, yeah.
It just seemed like that's how she was telling who did the reading. Like if you were mad the next day, you did the reading.
Nice.
You get a participation credit.
I totally feel that. Yeah.
Now, did your choice to major in gender and women's studies did that stem from your gender dysphoria and your identification, or did you start identifying after?
I identified after as a result of exposure to the ideas in the gender and women's studies program. I wanted to be a women's studies major, and I wanted to study women and the status of women around the world, and like be armed with statistics about women, and to understand how different levels of like patriarchies work, and just have a broad-based knowledge of that. I wanted to basically study sociology of women, and so but it was already gender and women's studies, so it was almost like a sort of Simone de Beauvoir kind of idea that like women are the second sex. Hope I'm not misquoting that. But it doesn't seem like we're allowed to just study women without studying gender. Like we always have to think about women as being the marked sex. We can't just be our own coherent category. You don't have to study gender to study men. They're the default.
Yeah.
We don't call it gender in history studies.
No, no, for sure. And in fact, like the biological reality is that they're the non-woman, like they're like the lesser than,
They
like
came
they're
later.
missing. They came later,
They
yeah.
came later. Yeah.
You could
Female
even
is the
see it in
member
the
of the species that
chromosomes.
produces offspring. So if there's only one sex, if it's an asexually reproducing species, it's going to be the sex that produces offspring. You know, the sex that buds to reproduce is not a male.
That's right.
Males are contingent.
Yeah.
I
Do
think they don't
you,
like that.
of course they don't. Do you subscribe to that idea that the gender is a hierarchy, not a binary?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Oh, sometimes the answer to the idea that gender is binary, from feminists, from like third, fourth plus wave feminists who are gender critical, they'll say gender isn't a binary, it's a hierarchy. So gender is
Mm,
like an externally imposed system where males or masculine people are on top, and like women or femininity in general, or those qualities that are supposedly ascribed to females and women are
mhm.
lesser, that like that
Right.
that type of idea, right?
Got it. No, I think that is fundamentally confused and backwards. I think that male and female obviously precedes any opinions we have about what it means to be a male and a female. And so what seems to happen from my understanding and research is that whatever qualities get assigned to females, because females are subordinated to males in a culture where males are empowered systematically, which is called patriarchy, because it's rule of the father specifically. So it's not all males, it's males that have gotten into a position of having power within the family and within the government. Um, that 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 in those systems, qualities that are attached to femaleness are devalued, and also devalued qualities get attached to femaleness in kind of a reciprocal situation. But that wouldn't necessarily be true in a system where females were the ones that had systematic power, had control of resources, which they want to erase the memory of such cultures, but they've existed in recent historical memory. So it's not
We're talking about matriarchies.
yes, matriarchies where you had rules in place to entrench
Big
female
smile for
power.
the female supremacist over there.
I'm a female supremacist. I don't even call myself a feminist. I'm a straight up female supremacist, and I want matriarchy, and that's real, and like not as like a future utopia, but like, yeah, real
Yeah.
strategies to make it
Well, I
happen.
mean,
Yeah.
there have been very recently colonized cultures where they had rules like that women were the ones who owned the houses. That was just a thing. It's not like the inverse has never existed. Like that's just typically how one of the things that patriarchies do is to eliminate women's ability to own property. But it's clearly better for most people most of the time, including men at the critical developmental periods of their life, for a woman to not have to worry that a man is going to come between herself and her house, or herself and her children's house, or herself and her children.
Yeah.
Like it just, because of biological differences, because men aren't women and women aren't men, it is actually better to systematically empower women on the basis of femaleness.
Yeah. And what do you think about this idea of like that battleground of gender? Like one of the things that I've had trouble with is like, why are we even I kind of want women to just like, I want us all to just withdraw from the battlefield of gender altogether. Like just like I've said in the past, like if men want it so bad, they can fucking have it. They can have shaving, they can have makeup, they can have high heels, they can have shoving like toxic, plastics and bleached materials into their, downstairs booty hole, Barbie pouches. They can have plastic surgery, they can have fashion, they can have restrictive clothing and shapewear, they can have bras, they can have hair and all kinds of that shit. They can go ahead. I won't rest until like every brothel is actually just populated by male-bodied people who fetishize sex work. Like fucking go ahead and have all of it. So my whole idea is like we should just withdraw from gender altogether, and like let them fucking have it, because they basically invented it. Like I think, male patriarchal, like, hetero capitalist society invented femininity, like commodified, commercialized femininity.
Yeah,
That actually
don't.
save the,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. I was
Oh,
gonna say that would save the porn guys money, because apparently the trans identified males get paid significantly less than the females, but and now to you.
Travel.
wait, the trans identify, so trans women get paid less than trans men in porn?
Significantly.
I guess that
No,
makes sense.
well,
This,
yeah, I probably than trans men, but I definitely less than women.
yeah. Right, which would be one of the few industries where that's true. Even in female dominated industries, males in those industries tend to get paid more. I think waitering is a classic example, because the higher end restaurants tend to hire male waiters, because it's a status experience to be served by a man. So
Yep.
I never even put that together, but that, yeah.
yeah, I'm drawing a lot from reading I did in college. I think that statistic came from the book Wife Work, by Susan Moshart. If not, either way, that's a great book to read.
I mean, I guess that's true also with like the majority of chefs are men, but then we expect the women to be doing the cooking at home.
Yeah, right. And unless it's something to do with meat, and the
Ah,
status symbol of being the person grilling the meat, then we probably don't know what to do after all. So it's yeah, I don't know that we that it's a fruitful use of our time to try to um prevent men from putting makeup on, um or to try to safeguard femininity markers. I think it's more useful use of our time to look into how we can actually meaningfully empower women, and not just give them a sense of empowerment, because a sense of empowerment can be a lie, but to meaningfully qualitatively give them systematic power. And how to go about that is a complex question. It's maybe considered to be at odds with the idea of equal rights, for instance. I don't know if those two things are compatible. I think there's a conversation to be had, though, of whether that's in women's best interests to be always treated identically, or
Yeah, I
whether
don't think it
we need
is.
to stop trying to make equal, because you end up invariably with this conflict, with this idea that, like, well, if we have female only spaces, it's segregation. You're treating me differently because I'm male. How dare you? So, if we want to have sex specific rights, like the right to only be around people of our sex in sleeping and transitional times, there is a tension there with the idea that the law should treat us in a sex blind manner. I don't think that that's ever in women's interests, to have our femaleness ignored.
that's a really good point. And it kind of reminds me of what Jordan Peterson says, but not exactly, with like equality versus like equality of outcome versus equality of any of opportunity, I guess is what he usually
Yes.
says.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
though that he I really like Jordan Peterson. Let me say that I really like him. He's been a huge influence on me, and I'm a big fan. Um, I do think though that sometimes he may overlook the psychological impact of living in a patriarchy, no matter how egalitarian the patriarchy is, and that has a tendency to kind of see that as being some sort of true middle, like there's some way to be a non-binary patriarchy. I don't think there is. I think it's either a patriarchy or a matriarchy. I don't know that there's true egalitarianism is meaningfully possible. And an egalitarian patriarchy is still a patriarchy.
I think egalitarianism might be possible if there was at least a generation or two of men being raised under matriarchy. I think that might produce the kind of men and the kind of male leadership that would be capable of sharing power in a significant way, and of having this sort of like separation of labor that would make sense according to the sexes. Yeah. But no, I
I
don't
just think
think
that
that.
there's an innate, inescapable interests that men have towards subjugating women, that are, it's not reciprocated, just because of
Right.
biological differences, and because
Yeah.
of a very long history of evolution. And I don't know that we'll ever be able to socialize that out of them, because I don't think you can socialize someone's biology out of them truly. I talk about fader males a lot with these birds, where there's 3 male subtypes within the species, and their mating behavior is all determined by whether they inherit one of 3 super genes, and it also affects their appearance. And so you have like a main group that's territorial males, and then you have another group that kind of like lives on the fringes and tries to fight the territorial males, and then you have a third group that evolved to look like females and pretend to be females, and then to jump in the middle of mating pairs at the last possible second, and then mate with the female. And they look so much like females that the scientists studying this colony didn't realize that they were not females for like 20 years. And they've been
so cool.
like this. The species has been doing this for like 20 times as long as humans have been a species. So if they were to evolve tomorrow to a point where the males all looked like they were the same kind of group of males, the way that we have it in humans, like if they just other pressures change them, that underlying difference in behavior that was super gene encoded, I don't think that would just be as quick to dissolve as shifting it slightly so that the males weren't visibly different.
So do you tend
Who
towards
knows
that?
what's in humanity? We don't know
Right,
what's in
right.
humanity. We don't know
Right.
about the subtypes. I joke about pedophenotype. Like maybe they inherited a pedophile super gene, and that's just why they can't stop being like that. I don't know.
Are you familiar with John Euler at all? Oh, you are. You
Yeah.
told me you caught a little bit. He says that there's no such thing as a minor attracted person, that like is that any of that is innate, but that it's like, but I guess it would make sense that some would be predisposed to having like anyone's predisposed to certain addictions because of genetics, but that he says that
Right.
it's a deliberate choice to become that depraved at a certain point. Like it's porn consumption, and then there's a choice to be getting rid of your conscience essentially, and so you get into more and more depraved stuff, and the final end stage of it is usually like castrated boys.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that the fact that you are genetically more prone to liking that stuff, I don't think that that's a choice. But in terms of having deranged reward pathways that would allow you to overcome your conscience, like there's a reason people make the choices that they do, and it can turn into a debate on is there free will, is there a soul, can anybody really be judged? I do think that you can still say that a person can be expected to take steps to not indulge in that, and yet it is a choice to go down that path, but it's not a choice to want to go down that path. And I think that
Really?
there's no, I in terms of like it feeling good to take steps down that path, and it being
Okay.
easier versus harder. I don't think it's a coincidence that most sex offenders are male. I don't think that's, and I don't think that it shows to be male. I think that there's clearly biological factors that make it more interesting and more rewarding and more easily changing your mental neurological reward pathways, reward seeking behavior patterns in response to stimuli. But it's kind of like with the PTSD thing, it's a nature nurture situation. And just because, your nature predisposed you to it, it doesn't mean you don't have the responsibility to do something about it. And
Yep.
that other people have to just
That's why I'm
tolerate
sober.
bad behavior.
I mentioned I got a really interesting question that I wanted to work in somehow for you specifically. And since there was a mention of castrated boys, they said, I am curious if she has any insight about the castrati opera singers of the past and why exactly the lack of testosterone made their voices so sought after. Is there a through line to castrations for choir boys from the past and the growing trend of parents whose trans daughters also become fashion models?
So in terms of why it led to them not having the deepening voice, there's testosterone receptors on connective tissue. So when you take sex hormones, they will act on the connective tissue and either promote increase in size, change in thickness, change in sponginess, or they will promote catabolysis, which is like the breakdown of it, depending on the hormone. And this can leads to the surface symptoms of the deepening voice. And it's not just a deepening voice. There's also the transmass voice disorder, where they get kind of a frog voice sound, where you have a reduction in the pitch range and less fluidity in it, and you get more. It's kind of like like this voice, like there's it's not fluidly moving in the same way because
Is
of
that also a
different.
result of tension building?
No,
You think?
it's I mean, there likely is some increase in tension, but it's also more directly the vocal folds are a multi-layer of connective tissue surrounding a muscle that's also attached to a ligament inside, and so the ligament is thickening, and that makes it harder to stretch because thicker stretchy
That
things are
makes,
harder to
so it's
stretch.
thickening. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
and
That makes a lot of
then there
sense.
it's stiffening, and then the muscle itself is also growing in size inside of the sheath. So as it grows inside, the sheath
It,
itself can't wave in the same way because it's kind of being inflated by the muscle.
that makes
So
a
all
lot
these
of
things are
sense.
conspiring, and then there's small little cartilage pieces that have to turn in very delicate ways to give us the control of pitch that we do at different air pressures, and that we need, because we need different air pressures to make different oral sounds. So all of these, it's a multifactorial problem that's giving rise to what seems to be an analog signal of just the voice making sounds, but it's all these different things that are moving, and all of them are reacting to testosterone differentially based on the tissue type, and it's all for a large part it's happening in the body of a for a female to male. It's somebody that developed as a female and didn't have those exposures in infancy, didn't have those exposures in the womb, doesn't have a Y chromosome. The Y chromosome independently affects body proportions and overall size, independent of testosterone. So AIs can, for instance, pick out male people who have complete androgen sensitivity from female people. They have different proportions because they have a Y chromosome. So all these things are conspiring to affect the surface sound of the voice. And the issue, though, is that those tissue types are throughout the body. They're not just in the voice. They're in the heart. They're in the brain. They're in your joints. They're all over. So just because you can't hear the changes in other parts of the body, it doesn't mean that they're not happening. So we know that if it's happening in their voice, it's also going to be affecting them in other ways that might give rise to things like heart attacks. And we know that females who are put on testosterone have a significantly increased risk of heart attack compared to both males and females. Because when you thicken an artery that's smaller because you have a Y chromosome or don't have a Y chromosome, and because you're a female and didn't have testosterone younger in life also, it becomes a problem faster. You see the same problem with people with dwarfism. They have much higher increased risk of heart attack because their bodies are smaller, their red blood cells are not smaller.
Oh.
So it becomes a problem mechanically faster.
So I guess there wouldn't really be a through line to them becoming fashion models then. Or I don't know, would there?
Well, you could conceive of it in terms of that you're making very unusual looking people that might be sought after by models for that reason. The other thing with these, when you mess around with sex hormones during puberty, the receptor distributions in bone as well are not equal. So different bones will have different parts of bones will have different like exposures to them. They'll have different blood supply, which gives them effectively a different dose. So we know from rat studies that differences in testosterone exposure, either blocking or giving them access, will change the midface size relative to other parts of your face. So it's and a big part of that is you have a lot more blood supply here, which is why this part of your face, if you're a painter, I like to do portraits, tends to be redder than the top and bottom of your face. So if you're going to be coloring somebody's skin tone, you want to add a little bit more red in the mid face because there's just this why your cheeks blush. And in other words, you've got a lot of blood supply in this area.
So is there anything you don't do?
Important things. Is there anything I don't do?
I mean,
drugs.
Now you're a painter, singer, linguist, apparently medical expert on all things gender. And I mean, this is all from your own research, right? Because it's not like you didn't study this, and from what I can glean from what I read about you.
I do have a master's degree in speech language pathology and did get some education on the transgender voice through that program, as well as through the voice generally. So I am drawing a bit on that. when I talk about things within my scope of practice for that. But no, a lot of this is I'm my own interests and my own research and generalizing knowledge from other sources.
Do you write music as well as sing?
No, I'm not good at writing music. I'd like to someday maybe, but no, I mostly just I like to sing for the technical challenge of it.
And
My
I know
brother writes
Masha, you
music.
want
He's very good at it.
you're a very
Yeah, we
talented
were just
family.
talking before before you came on, we were talking about like voice training and singing and so forth. And yeah, the because of the whole castrati thing came up, and
Oh yeah,
I
there's
think
another
that
part of that question you wanted me to answer.
yeah. But from like there was a time that I thought I was going to be a coloratura soprano, and then it didn't work out. But anyway, but yeah, castrati were like was thought to be a very angelic voice. So like there's a whole like historical like movement that is also there. It's very like steeped in like religious feeling about the kind of like
Purity of a
I would say
castrated.
like purity of boys particularly, right? Like the idea that female, no matter how young a woman is, as a girl, how young a female being is, they're always fallen, and they're always like we're always somehow demonic, satanic, dirty,
Mm.
whatever, but boys before they reach sexual maturity, um, are angelic. So
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes sense because
Mm.
opera singers sometimes their voices, like women's voices who are opera singers, they'll still have all their opening, they'll still be tension free, they'll still have that flow, but their voices will get lower as they age because of the less estrogen their body's producing. So I guess with boys, the less testosterone they produce, or not at all, they're going to stay in that kind of falsetto, um, even higher than
Right.
baritone, soprano type voices.
Yeah. With male voices, they deepen and then they start to rise with age, and female voices, stay high and then lower with age. And so the male and female voice actually get closer together as you get into the elderly time period. So hormones do continue to act on the voice throughout the life, and have interesting effects in terms of the castrati. The way that they would do it generally, is basically, they would remove the testicles. And I've commented in the past that I feel like that would be kinder to do for trans kids than to give them puberty blockers, because
whoa.
puberty blockers are acting on the brain, and they turn off the it's called a pulsatile, so it's pulsing release of gonadotropins from the hypothalamus, and that's a complex rhythm that's changing based on time of day, time of year, and age, and other factors, and in response to your body's system. And so it's blasting that area with a continuous dose of gonadotropins, and I also or gonadotropin releasing hormone, I should say, which turns off its own natural rhythm in production. I found out recently also the another hormone called Depo-Provera is also acting in very much the same way, which shocked me. I was like, oh,
Isn't
someone told
that
me it acted on your brain.
yeah, isn't
I feel
that
like that's important information.
yeah, isn't that like the
It's
implant that heterosexual
an
women
injection.
receive to oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's prescribed as birth control, and
Right.
they're told it's the same, and it's not gonna. But there's a reason it causes the bone loss that puberty blockers also cause. There's a reason, and that's because it's turning off that system, which then turns off production in the pituitary of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, and I imagine other ones that I just haven't come across yet, because it's all complex and not that well understood how all this works. And those hormones we know are important for the development of the gonads, but also of your neurology. And we know that dysregulation of those hormones is implicated in development of motor disorders and Alzheimer's disease. So we know that these are hormones which are coming from the brain and traveling through the blood and then acting on the gonads, that they're making pit stops along the way and doing other stuff. We just know that. And it's just basic reasoning to know that you can't take a drug and have it circulate systemically and have it only work in one area. Like
And I feel like we know that about other drugs. Like there's a reason that performance enhancing drugs and like I'm an amateur bodybuilder, and like there's a lot of women in my orbit that will like hop on a cycle of like, specific like androgenic drugs and like they know that there's a risk of virilization that's
Right.
unwanted, but like, it's hugely not just frowned upon, like there's an understanding that it's incredibly harmful and that you're,
Right.
but that those drugs are, but not the ones that we're giving to
Yeah, well,
kids. Like,
at the higher dose for cosmetic, for specifically so that we can dose them to the extent that they're virilized, and the dose makes the poison. Drugs are chemical math problems, so it's like when you are taking it to the point where you virilize, it's obviously a higher dose than taking it at a lower dose where you don't virilize. There's no magical way to get enough exposure on the receptors to do that. And so with the castrati, because they're only removing the testicles, they're not stopping that whole process in the brain. And therefore, castrati, even though they had testicle removers, they were kind of infamous womanizers from history, and so they still had sexual function, they still had interest in that we're not seeing so much in the puberty suppressed kids.
But what you mean by sexual function is like sexual interest, right? Because I mean, they can't, they
Like they
couldn't.
had crushes on people and they sought relationships that were like that,
Okay.
and to have those kind of emotional connections with other people. They may not have been able to have total sexual function, but they definitely still had sexual interest, and that kind of spark that so differentiates adults from kids.
Now you mentioned the hypothalamus. So I wanted to know if there was an anonymous doctor that I think, now I'm forgetting his name, Chris something, interviewed, and he said that essentially a doctor at a major children's hospital explains how puberty blockers shut down a child's hypothalamus, which controls emotion, sexuality, and aesthetic sense. And he said it would be shut down. It would be like shutting down the system that makes us human beings. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that we should be messing with the system without an extremely good reason. And I don't
Yeah,
think
because
cosmetics is a good reason.
no, but it seems like, I mean, it disrupts even our ability to enjoy music, see something and think it's beautiful. Like that's
I
basically
mean,
what he was
people
saying.
with this with the there's a natural version of this situation called Kallman syndrome, or also uh, it's a form of hypogonadism, but it's during development a portion of neurons that go on to become the hypothalamus, they don't migrate correctly, and so the hypothalamus doesn't form correctly, and so they don't produce the pulsatile gonadotropins, and they don't go through puberty without help. But another implication is that they often can't smell. They lack a sense of smell, and that profoundly affects you, especially if it's something that's happening early in childhood. Which the puberty suppressed kids, they had a normal childhood, normal development, and then they were chemically lobotomized with this drug, because it's no different than if they took a knife in and they just damaged the hypothalamus, which would be a physical lobotomy. It would have a similar effect. When you damage parts of the brain, they don't produce the hormones they're supposed to produce. Puberty blockers also are known to have the capacity to cause it. I haven't found a case study in the literature where this happened in a child who was receiving it for gender reasons yet, but it's a matter of time. It's just a matter of time. The youngest person I found was 22, and she was receiving it for fertility treatments. But if you have an undiagnosed pituitary adenoma, which is a kind of tumor that might be asymptomatic, then the first shot of Lupron can cause your pituitary to die. It's called pituitary apoplexy. And the pituitary, of course, makes a lot of very important hormones. And so there's not really any going back from that. You can end up with a form of diabetes that requires medication. It's called a diabetes insipidus, and it's not related to sugar, but it still produces the symptom of peeing a lot and not being able to stay hydrated.
I had no idea of this. Holy shit. And I thought I was like widely informed and well read on the subject. Oh my God. Who's tracking this? Like when you're doing your research and you're reading, like where are you finding this, and is it being kind of like collected anywhere at like is anyone in the medical establishment talking about it? I know, I mean, I'm European, and there's been some serious sort of like backlash in the sort of medical establishment there against these protocols, but in North America, it seems like Westoids are like, let's fucking just do all of it.
Yeah, they're safe. They're safe because we've been using them safely for 40 years. It's like, yeah, to slightly delay puberty, not to stop it and
Yeah.
then
Well,
screw around with it with the cross-sex hormones. Like, this is a totally different use of this drug. But I know that the FDA recently put a warning label onto puberty blockers because of an issue of brain swelling, which presumably is happening because of changes in the hormone production of the brain, and which, ultimately the brain is a very salty place. And so if the salt imbalance compared to the blood gets off, you can end up with issues where either the fluid is going abnormally into the brain, causing the brain to swell, or it's being pulled out of the brain and causing the brain to shrink, and it's not good. It's not good to have a salt imbalance, because that'll affect functioning elsewhere. But you can also end up with where you have hydrocephalus, and you just end up with excess fluid on the brain, and that's yeah, it can cause a lot of issues. One of the I believe the vision loss was one effect for one of the 6 kids that they identified as having puberty blocker induced brain swelling, because it'll also put pressure on nerves like your optic nerve, and as well as areas that are processing information from the nerves like your visual cortex and your brain. And so if you get damage to those areas, you can end up with the vision loss from a lack of nerve conduction. You can end up with vision loss from a lack of a brain area to process the information. Cortical blindness is called, which may or may not be reversible. So when they're telling them that these are perfectly safe, reversible pause button, like there's no pausing metabolism. What are you talking about?
Are you sure that it won't be different because they have male
in titanium?
Are you sure that it won't have just the normal effect because they have male and female brains?
I mean, I do believe in male and female brains. I definitely think that there's such a thing as a male brain and a female brain. I think that denying that makes no sense. There's genetic differences, there's hormonal developmental differences, there's structural differences. AI can pick out male brains, even if they have not had any testosterone exposure. AI can figure out which brain is male. There's proportion differences throughout the body from having a Y chromosome. And so it's there. We converge in function similar to having different hips that converge in function of walking. So I'm not saying that one group is automatically more intelligent or more capable at this or that task. But to say that there's no differences and no medical implications of those differences is not helpful. I don't think that's helpful to anyone.
But do trans women have female brains?
No,
yeah,
categorically no. No, they do not. People try to say that if you actually click through their links to that, it's invariably after they've been on drugs, and which just tells you drugs change the brain. They still have male brains. AI could still figure out that they're not women.
yeah. It wasn't the only test done on ones that well, there was the 2 that I know of, but one was on on corpses, right? They were doing it post-mortem.
Yeah, they're doing them on corpses of people who've taken estrogen cosmetically, and they've had cosmetic changes from the estrogen, and then they're finding that those cosmetic changes extend to the brain, and then they're saying, oh, well, those cosmetic changes are kind of in the direction of females because females also are on estrogen, therefore they had a female brain. But it's after the hormone exposure. There have also been MRI studies that I've reviewed on my channel. I have 2 playlists. One is called literature review for scientific literature that I respect, and then there's literature review where it's clearly propaganda that's been published. Yeah,
yeah.
And in each of those, there's 2 different studies that did fMRI studies of brain structure and function before and after the hormones, neither of them found that they had female brains before that. One of them concluded that they had their brains became feminized, and then a replication that later said, well, changes happened. We're not going to say that they became feminized, but changes definitely happened. So that's the one that ended up in literature review. Whereas the first
and
one
then there was one
review.
that I read about that they were equating gay male reactions to certain imagery with proof that this person had a female brain, when it was really just like firing off sexual, like what someone's attracted to. So it really had nothing to do with
a lot of squishiness trans. Where they'll compare heterosexual men, homosexual men, and trans women and they won't even try to mention the sexuality of sexual orientation there. And you also see the same thing with certain disorders of sexual development. They'll put them in fMRIs and try to say that, well, they reacted to sexual imagery that females typically react to because most females are heterosexual, therefore they're women. And it's just it seems a little political. It's also a lot of the breastfeeding, male breastfeeding comes from attempts to allow that cohort to breastfeed.
Wait, can you say that again?
Where if there's a lot of literature that you can look up where they had a patient who had a disorder of sexual development where they're testosterone insensitive, and so they end up looking very feminine. So that a lot of these protocols of domperidone to induce lactation to allow a person to breastfeed somebody else's child, or a female's child, in other words, for that emotional experience. That's kind of where it started. And where they concluded that it was a safe, good idea.
How is that even comparable though? It's like, that's wild. Sorry, I keep grabbing her because it's feeding time at 5, but it's protocol to scream at me for an hour at least beforehand. I don't think
we can't see her in the frame right now. So the her that you're referring to is like a little mystifying. I'm like, who are you grabbing?
She's in the corner. I keep picking her up because it's like I consider a timeout. It's like putting her in timeout. And then she'll go away for a while when that happens. Otherwise, she'll just sit there and be like, meow. Like, until I feed her.
So we just did with the turfing, we did like a 3-episode kind of like takedown of Benjamin Boyce's interview with Phil Illey, who's the autogynephile who just published a book. Are you familiar with him at all?
No, first time I'm hearing the name.
Oh, okay. No worries. So there's that's the etiology of like the actual autogynephile, right? Like, so for all purposes, heterosexual male who fetishizes femininity to the point of like decide. So I'm gonna just butcher his explanation, but I just remember the video being full of this Phil guy talking about how there's a woman in him that he's in love with, and there's like a lot of like, soft romantic language about the her inside. So I wanted to ask you, where is the woman in these in trans women?
So when I hear stuff like that, I think about how if you take a very powerful magnet, you can put it on someone's head and you can induce in them the experience of being behind themselves. You can completely dislocate
no idea about this.
Yeah. You can, and that can also, of course, happen naturally. Your sense of being in yourself and being yourself and being at the center of your senses, like that's something your brain is actively doing and constructing, and that can be disrupted. You can end up with a dissociated experience that you are physically behind yourself in some way outside of your body. So I think about that when I hear people talking about how I'm in love with myself as a woman. It's like, okay, well, what are you actually experiencing here? Like, I don't actually know what your internal life is. Or is there something wonky where something's misfiring and you are experiencing yourself as outside of yourself, and that's why you want to like make yourself a little doll that you can control? Like, what's going on here?
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting
That's not the woman's experience. Healthy women don't experience ourselves that way.
No, can confirm.
Yeah.
But I'm always interested in people's in women's like I think we all have like we all try and make sense of this shit, right? And so we all have like our own frame of reference and like our own knowledge that we bring to it. Mine has typically been that it's some sort of like targeting error of like desire and like sexual erotic need, and that in these autogynephilic males, they decide to fixate on themselves because they want to fully control and suppress a woman that can only be played out on their own body. Like, so that's my explanation that for whatever reason.
I think that's pretty on the money, that they want to that a big part of it is that they like the idea of being the controlled woman and being someone controlling a woman, and it's entirely self-contained and self-reinforcing.
Yes.
There's
Like a tidy little
something
humiliation
that,
fetish
yeah,
plus sadism.
they're in a track that's going to just keep deepening
Yeah.
if there's no intervention. But
Yeah.
it's not good for any individual. It's not what I would want for any of my loved ones, for instance, to be stuck in that
Right.
kind of a track. Just because it feels good doesn't mean it's good for them.
I low
It's
key
not
don't
healthy.
care.
You
It's
low key
not,
don't care.
I low key don't care. I just don't want to have to participate in it, and I don't want it
I
to
guess
be done in
I've cared
public.
about some unhealthy people
The only reason
who became unhealthy through no fault of their own. Like
I
you don't
see.
know when someone's gonna have a virus can go to your brain and cause a lesion, and that can just change you forever. And it's not your fault, and it could happen. Like, most people have, if not everybody has at least some form of one of the many herpes viruses, for instance. And most of them don't cause cold sores either. They're totally asymptomatic. One of it is called
Oh,
CMV that like 97% of people have. But if you don't have it, the Red Cross wants your blood because it goes to preemies, because if preemies get a CMV infection, they can get brain lesions more easily. But herpes viruses as a class, and chickenpox is also a herpes virus. Herpes viruses as a class, they cross the blood-brain barrier and they can hide from your immune system, and so you can't get rid of them. And at any time, they could just decide to cause a brain infection, and then you could end up in a coma tonight from having brain lesions.
ah,
Yeah, no, this is the horror that I live with. I saw this happen as a kid to somebody. So yeah,
God,
that I was
really?
this, yeah. So it's one of the things that I grew up around was the aftermath of that. So someone who was totally healthy on vacation, then bam, just cold sores on your brain basically.
Damn. So
So
do you think that this like autogynephilic fixation or this like ideation of the feminine self inside of some males, do you think it's some form of like virus, whether it's like a thought virus or like what do you think it
I think
is?
you could think of it as a thought virus, but it also might literally be that this person had a brain infection that maybe was subclinical, didn't get diagnosed, didn't put them in a coma. This individual that I'm talking about, it was very obvious that it happened. He woke up paralyzed like 40 years later from a coma and had a
Oh.
very long physical recovery and protracted. He was never the same, and that made him vulnerable to behavior patterns that weren't there before because he's ultimately a person. So it's like we have the capacity to resist these inborn behavior circuitries that we all have different levels of, um, temporarily at best, and hopefully we get to the end of our lives without losing that. But probably we're all going to go through a period in our lives near the end where we don't have that capacity anymore, and we are subject to behavior patterns that are lower level, um, and we lose our control. So I have a lot of sympathy for people that are caught up in that because I don't know what happened to them. I don't know why they're like that. I don't know if it's a genetic thing. I don't know if it's they had a virus. I don't know if they got hit in the head. Nobody knew about it. I don't know, but something happened that led to this, and I want people to be able to have protections from the symptoms of that illness. And I don't want to stigmatize people just because of the form the illness takes, because it could be me tomorrow. We don't know. Any one of us, it could be any one of us. I know that because I'm female, if I'm in that situation, I am far less likely to become a sexual predator as a result. And that is not something I chose. That's just because I'm female. And the male is far more likely to if they lose the higher capacity and the ability to resist. But I think that we need to have systems in place to protect everybody from the consequences of these illnesses that are much bigger and much beyond our capacity to correct or prevent right now as a species.
You're a deeply
Okay.
empathetic person, huh? Aren't you?
Yeah, I try.
Well, I can learn a lot from that because I can be a little callous towards these men, so it was appreciated. Um, have you do you think much about the element of porn causing autogynephilia and what that triggers in the brain?
Yeah, I think it's something that triggers something for these individuals, along with their choice to continue exposing themselves to the trigger. But I also think that those experiences are like any other drug, and it changes the brain, it changes reward pathways, and to unchange that, they would need extensive rehabilitation, and a lot of them don't want that.
That's
Like a lot of
one of
drug
my
users don't
deepest
want that.
concerns.
And it's very natural to respond to that with anger and disgust when somebody's choosing to use a drug that's causing them to behave in harmful ways, and it's causing them to change in ways that are making them worse as people, and they're still doing it. It's a very normal human thing to react to that with anger and disgust. And it's hard to be able to still take a step back and recognize that they didn't ask to be susceptible to these reinforcement patterns and to have brains that change in response to things. And it's not their fault they didn't have the education sooner entirely. It's hard. It's hard to love people that are making you really pissed off and are hurting people. It's really hard.
Well, I have the
hard.
deepest concern and empathy for the little boys and girls that are being spammed porn, but it's going to primarily affect the boys. And then it's
It
just,
affects the girls
and
too. It severely affects girls' brains too. It
oh,
just
really?
differently.
Because
I don't think
okay,
it's good
because
for
what I've
girls
read,
to
it
be
was
exposed to
mostly,
porn. I think it damages their psychosocial development. I don't think that it changes the behavior in the same way. In terms of reward seeking, I don't know that there is susceptible to continually seeking it out and being changed in that way. But I do think it sends them a message of what kind of person they are, what other people expect of them. And if that happens in a critical developmental window when they're like 11, 12, 13, I think that can be profoundly damaging to them and in their future relationships, and make them vulnerable on a subconscious level to hearing people who are willing to send them that message that yes, you're correct, that this is what I wanted from you. And then you end up just in very toxic relationships. So I do think it deranges the development. It makes them start thinking about those topics when they should be focused on how to have healthy relationships. And something is changing in the brain from that exposure. You know, I'm one of the, like my generation was I think the first one to have the internet in our rooms during that age, and it was a problem back then too. So I definitely think that it's traumatizing, and
yeah,
trauma during critical developmental windows has more profound effects than the same trauma as an adult.
100%. I guess what I meant is when I've read studies, it says that porn actively changes the male brain in ways that it doesn't the female, but it makes perfect sense when it definitely clearly changes what girls feel like they're expected to do, and ways that they're expected to behave, and how they're valued and what makes them valuable.
And what they might, just physically, even what they're going to be asked to do. And the idea that you know, they may want to grow up and have attachment to other people. And when this intrudes on that and says, you know, this attachment won't happen unless you make yourself available to this sort of violent, you know, altercation, because you don't have a context for it at that age. So they all look violent. Like, it's hard, and women also are dealing at that age as girls with the shame of having a biological function that boys don't have, that's embarrassing and out of your control and unpredictable, and all these things kind of conspire, and the fact that not having the specific reaction that boys have, and then the specific behavior response that boys have, doesn't mean that our brains aren't also changing when we're exposed to that stuff. It's just I feel like it's more of a anxiety trauma type reaction than a reward dopamine pathway seeking reaction. But the brain's plastic, and plastic deformation is, as they were saying a lot in regards to the Titan submersible. Once you get to you can get regular deformation that can bounce back, and then once you get to a plastic deformation, it's not reversible. It doesn't spring back. You know, if metal fatigues and starts to stretch, you can't unstretch it. You have to remelt it and reform it to regain that function. So the brain is plastic in that way. You shouldn't don't melt your brain. I don't recommend melting your brain to reform it. It will also still not be the way it was.
Why do you think that people that are autistic are so much more prone to this? Because it seems like we were talking about the predisposition. I understand the more of the sort of like, if I don't fit in this box, I go to this box, and I've heard that a lot with people explaining why, but I'd kind of be curious to hear you unpack that a bit more.
Sure. With kind of core to autism are social pragmatic difficulties in social pragmatics is the area of language related to understanding how to use language, including body language, and how to have a conversation, how to take turns, things like that, how to read facial expressions. And core to the deficit is a lack of like modeling yourself as an individual in a space with other individuals that are different from you, that have their own perspective. Like, it's just fundamentally not how you model the world if you're autistic. If you're autistic, you're looking at how sounds and lights match up, what movements predict other movements. It's a very mechanistic way of looking at the world, very cause and effect. And so that is an earlier stage of development than like imaginative play and mutual play that most people who are not autistic are going through at 3, 4, 5, that age. It just doesn't happen. So you get to a point later where someone's like, well, let's all pretend that we're different. Let's all engage in imaginative play together. And it's like, oh, this is a developmental like experience that I really didn't get because I was too distracted trying to figure out how moving my arm would cause my arm to change and how it felt. So I was going to keep doing this to be like, what's going to happen next? It's stimming. So like there's a reason that autistic people will stim, which is short for self-stimulate. They're trying to figure out the cause and effect of sensory motor experiences. There's a stall there. And so you can get to a point where it's like, well, this play experience later actually causes new connections to form that makes you have realizations. And it's fun to have realizations. Who doesn't like having realizations, especially if it's allowing you to be able to model the social world more effectively than you could before. So I think for that reason, I think that kind of all can broadly be thought of as an executive function deficit, a lack of kind of a deep structure. And so if you have that like kind of a lack of a deep structure, it does make you more vulnerable to somebody coming along and saying, here's a model of a deep structure for yourself, try to internalize it. And act accordingly. And it's kind of like you're still trying to put the pieces together because there's typical but delayed development, and then there's the autistic development where some things are developing way faster than they should be, some things are developing way slower than they should be, and other things are developing at the predictable time. So like I learned to read way early. It was not a normal like level of learning to read. I skipped crawling and went into walking way early. So some things were way advanced, some things were just not happening. And it's hard to figure out if you don't have a model of autism, like what the heck is going on. Why can't you do some things but not other things? So and on top of that, with gender, it's all about social pragmatics. It's all about how do I behave towards other people. So it's when you have a deficit there and you finally found a community where that's all anyone wants to talk about is how to behave towards other people. It's like it's kind of nice to be like, okay, I feel accepted here. I feel like these are my people. I feel like it's okay to express that I don't understand how this stuff works. And so it's but they're getting them to cut body parts off.
Yeah. That's the
pound of flesh.
That's my thing. Like, I'm going to echo something you said here about like basically there, but for the grace of God, go I. I also was like a gender non-conforming child, and I really like kind of imprinted on my dad. Like I thought I was gonna grow up to be like him because we spent a lot of time together, and I had the similar interests and fishing and hunting and outdoorsmanship and all of these kind of like masculine things. But my parents raised me in a very non-gendered way, and I was an only child, so I had no siblings to compare to. So I was like, whatever. And yeah, I think for if I was growing up today with different parents, I would totally be like on the path to transition, So I feel that. I'm not going to say I do have a lot of sympathy, especially for children who are trying to make sense of this world and their place in it, and particularly girls. So I wanted to ask if there was a specific thing that triggered your identification with like the sort of like trans narrative, like what caused that overlay to sort of like your system kind of accepting it, like when you kind of decided you might be a trans man.
It really did have a lot to do with exposure to the ideas from at school. I mean, I was in college, but it was I was told that this might be a thing, and everyone else was thinking about it too, and we were talking about it together. And um, I had a romantic interest that was sharing that how they felt that was true for them. And another one too, where I exposed that person to it, and that person also then was like, oh yeah, this is true for me as well. And we're all just kind of having this realization together. And in a way, it was a way of feeling safe, because especially in those days, there was the idea that we're all super rare. It was a very, very rare thing to have gender problems. So this means that these relationships are more secure, because where are you going to go? You're all weird and different like me. We're stuck together. So it's kind of like a coping with a anxious attachment issues, I think.
That's really
Um,
interesting. I'd never heard that anyone say that before, but that makes a lot of sense. And it's also can be ripe with potential for abuse then too, which is really scary and alarming.
yeah, absolutely.
Isolation.
Because in these groups, you get the people that are attracted to the, like, people with social pragmatic issues tend to clump, but manipulative people also tend to end up in those groups, because there's prey. So you end up, and especially in, if it works for you, I'm not do what you want, but like I polyamory is, as a structure for relationships, is just very much designed to allow a manipulative person to manipulate people who are anxious attachment issues, and are afraid of being left. And it's just it's not good. So
I
you just
s-
end up like in you got a chaperone when you have social pragmatic based groups, like to make sure that there's not somebody who's just like slightly ahead of them, and therefore is willing to be controlling and manipulative and gaslighty. And when we already have a condition that makes you like your cause and effect understanding didn't click the way that it should, you may be more easily manipulated, because you don't know why things unfolded the way they did. So there might be a sensory processing delay, for instance. So you might be overly reliant on a person that doesn't have that issue to tell you what's real and what happened, and they can manipulate that, and then convince you that your problems of perception are actually more significant than they are, or that you're perceiving things that didn't actually happen when that's not your issue. You're just slow to perceive, so you're behind, and you don't perceive when you should, but that's different from perceiving when you shouldn't. So it's a complicated situation, but I think for all these reasons, it's certain people are uniquely vulnerable to it. People who are same sex attracted and have issues about that, and don't want to just kind of accept that that's a thing about them. They this culture offers them a way to pretend that they're not. Like, I'm not same sex attracted. I'm just supposed to be the other sex. So take my arm and put it on my crotch. Problem solved.
Yeah, I mean, I'm same sex attracted, but I've always been like fairly femme, like in that really, and attracted to masculinity, well, masculine, attracted to butch dykes. And so there was like a time, I don't know if you were around or if you were aware of this, but there was like for a while like a dating site that was like a Buck Angel dating site, specifically where like where you could like date trans men, like which at that time I was like totally in the gender wang. Like I was good with it. So I thought like, well, I'm attracted to like butch dykes, but there aren't any around, so I'm just gonna date
Mm,
trans men, I guess. But and like I dated several women off of that site, but it seemed like there was a lot of pathology and self-hatred, and there definitely wasn't the like the ingredients for stable relationships or like mutual understanding. And like I think really I wanted like that classic like Paris 1920s like butch femme kind of dynamic at the time, but no, that didn't happen. So I'm wondering if you've noticed like in sort of like the gay lady community? Like where has the masculinity gone? You know, like what's going on? Like are we just like not really allowed to signal any amount of like that bravado, that swagger, that like butch dyke thing without like, you know, sort of being shuttled into some form of like trans umbrella, like a
Yeah.
like non-binary identification at the very least? Like what do you think?
Yeah, I think that especially these days, if you are deviating from gender expectations of your sex, there's lots of people willing to volunteer that, you know, maybe you're trans, maybe you're non-binary, you know, maybe you'd be happier. And like, and it kind of seems to make sense if you are somebody that is uncomfortable with femininity as a woman and more comfortable wearing more masculine clothes, which I've gone back and forth in my life because I guess I'm gender fluid. Um,
Bravo. Isn't that kind of all of us?
Yeah, I
That's
think
what I
we're all
thought.
gender fluid. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
wore a
thought,
tux, a pink tux to my prom.
oh,
I went with
neat.
my girlfriend because my boyfriend was in college already.
Um, what did I wear?
Jeez.
I wore dresses to the regular prom. And I think I wore a tux to the gay prom I went to. I'm trying to recall though, because it was in like ninth grade. It was a long time ago.
I
I
wore a
definitely wore.
three-piece suit with nothing under the vest. So I had like kind of my titties out,
That's
but it was still a little
sexy.
bit man wear.
That's
Menswear kind
hot.
of, and like a tie, but like no.
Mhm. Well, like that's the thing is that I felt deeply uncomfortable with people being interested in me for me. Like I just because of anxious attachment issues.
Me too. I
Um,
just always wanted to be super hot.
yeah, but I like the idea of being the object of somebody else's interest if it was somehow not me. And so it's like playing dress up kind
Oh,
of
I get you.
and playing pretend is a way to not have to be self-aware in that way.
I get you.
That would then trigger the sense of the like catastrophizing of how it's all going to fall apart. And as soon as they realize I'm me, dun dun dun.
So did that translate into like long-term relationships? Because I've had a bit of that where I like would even catch myself like be just like moving in a certain way, like in relationships, or always having to have this sort of outfit on or being the perfect version of myself. Did you feel that when you were like in long-term relationships and beyond, like I have to be this, so I'm going to prom or whatever, but like where you found yourself morphing into something you aren't just to
Yeah, no, definitely, especially in the the the, the polyamorous adventure that went on for like 5 years.
What? You were
was
what, in
that
a polycule? Like
was a
a
polycule.
throuple or what?
It was a polycule. It didn't really end until I got to graduate school, and the people around me are like, "What? This doesn't sound very healthy for you. It sounds like you're kind of unhappy
Damn.
all the time."
Aw, shit.
Called it a
was
love
this
octagon.
mostly during your transitional
Octagon.
phase too?
Yeah, I was trans during this phase, and then it was through the grad school and like kind of the fact that my peers were not at all interested in it. It's like they didn't have a problem with it. It's not like they were like, "Go
You just
away,
want to hear
queer."
You
They
weirdo.
but it was
They
just
still wanna
like
hear
it was
about it.
not something that was being socially reinforced. Whereas in the gender group or in polyamory is like that's all you talk about, and so it's like that's that doing the next thing in the scavenger hunt, getting your breast cut off. Or
That's true. Oh
hey,
my
I started
God.
drugs.
I totally
You
feel
guys want
that.
to talk about this drug I started today?
Yeah. Oh, and being
Well, like
psychonauts, like let's do all of the like, you know,
Look,
mind
I had
expanding.
breasts before. Now they're flat. Why are they flat? Guess, you guys. No, but it's like they just didn't care, and it was just like, but like they were still interested in me, and it was kind of a different experience of being like, well, maybe this isn't something I need to be doing. And I was also, you know, going through therapy at that time, and I had seen the effects of one of my love octagons top surgery. I wasn't happy about that, and that happened like right before I started grad school, and so I just feel like I just started realizing like, and they were more and more into this idea that if you take testosterone, you're literally a male now, and I just wasn't about that because I was like, that's just not how. No, I don't agree that you should be in the HIV study just because you're on testosterone. I think that maybe your thinking is compromised a bit.
That's brutal. That's intense. That's intense. So
But
you
they
saw
let
the
trans women
surgery
in and they're
scars?
women.
Like
Well, I mean,
you
I
saw
saw
your
the immediate
lovers.
afterward. Yeah, like she
Oh,
got the
yeah.
surgery, and
And the
then
drains
I
and
went over and
everything?
we all had shifts, and so I was so she had the drain, and it was just like the contrast between like how excited she was, the fact that like she just didn't have these body parts anymore. She had drains coming out. She had blood bags. Like
Mm.
it just felt wrong. It was just like, okay, I don't want to play this game anymore. This isn't fun
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think you
I had
should
a
have done
similar
this.
experience, but I didn't take care of her when she was recovering. But like my girlfriend in university had like, and she had like the most incredible tits, if I can say. She had like breasts
Yeah.
that were
Oh,
like
that is sad though. That
beautiful. Like,
makes it way more tragic.
and I hate to say I objectified the shit out of her, but she had glorious, glorious breasts. And they were gone. And like the next time I saw, and she was more femme than I, like just
Mhm.
curvy and beautiful. And yeah, and then we had broken up and kind of drifted apart. And the next time I saw her was like, and she'd been dating trans men. She'd been dating also like me, like, you know, dating like Butch Dykes and then trans men, and then somehow like assimilated that in and decided that she was also a trans man. And
Mhm.
I saw her, and like her curvy shape didn't go away, like just because she had her chest like
Right.
gone, she still had a beautiful, you know, curvy bottom and hips, and all of that was still there. And she was just trying to dress to like minimize it or to like make it go away. And it was one of the things that when we were dating, she was really proud of. Like she really loved her body, and she was in her body, and she loved to use her body in a sexual way. And then we like anyway, so I like ran into her again, and we tried to kind of like we went out on a couple dates, and she was so uncomfortable with herself, and like even just any amount of like affection seemed like she was like really dissociating, like when she was being when we were touching. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't like it was I'm like devastated about that person, like to be honest, like but what she what she did, what was done to her, like I
Yeah.
don't the
Yeah. This
surgeons that
person's
did that,
I'm sorry.
yeah, no, the but right, like that's that I think that should be illegal. Like I think that they absolutely
Mhm.
mutilated her.
Yeah. Her I've never quite seen scars like this elsewhere either. Like it was I don't know if she had like a connective tissue weakness. She did have a history of anorexia. She was pretty tall for a female. So which is consistent with connective tissue disorders too. So like Ehlers-Danlos, for instance, um, or Marfan's.
Uh-oh,
She's not Marfan's, but
Caitlin and I are both over 5'9".
Yeah.
yeah. Do you have
Yeah,
kind
we're
of
tall
Yeah,
as
close
fuck.
being?
I'm almost 6 feet
5'10".
tall. Yeah.
I'm 5'10".
Yeah. I mean, there's other
5'9" and
symptoms
three
too.
quarters, but that's a little
I know a
bit
lot
of a
about connective
mouthful, so I
tissue
just say
disorders. If you ever want to talk, yeah, I'm not tall though. They don't always produce excess height, but sometimes. But in any case, they healed in a way that they ended up kind of like looking like these red smiles, like the scars kind of separated, and so they kind of had like a crescent moon kind of look to them. And I don't know if that was because the surgeon just took too much out and didn't plan ahead well. That was probably
Yeah,
part
and
of
then
it.
it
But
mm,
also you can end up with weak connective tissue, something called a cigarette paper scars, and so they were kind of like that, which is why they were bright red. So they look like little red cyclops, two of them, and it just and then the nipples were all like stretched out.
the nipples like are really unsettling on so many of these pictures I see.
The nip
Just
nops.
yeah. Yeah, and are they even they can't be sensitive anymore, right?
They will describe them as like electric shocks or numbness or sometimes a phantom nipple. So they'll have to like
Boo.
stand in front of a mirror and touch where the nipple used to be.
Boo. Boo. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't what do you think of this terminology of the zipper tits? I'm not down with like ridiculing the results of these surgeries
Oh,
in
come
that
on.
sense.
Rot Pocket is pretty good.
Rod pocket, but oh my God, but I've seen it. I've seen it.
Only for
It's
Kelly
I've seen
Cadigan.
pictures and I'm not
horrific.
wait, in person or like I've
No,
seen
no,
pictures,
not the
but
Rod pocket.
Yeah, I've definitely not been so blessed as to see one in person. I do think
um
that it's important to keep in mind that there's people that feel affected by these terms, who have left that ideology.
That is true.
At the same time, you know, I recently published an article, or had an article of mine published, where they title the articles, and so the title that they gave was medical mutilation or genital mutilation for the masses, and I got some blowback criticism about that you know, mutilation is not something that detransitioners like to be said, but at some point, you know, I think we need to be able to talk about the fact that this you had a body part cut in such a way that it no longer looks or functions the way that it used to. And yeah, so I think it's good to be kind of mindful of that. But I try to focus more on mocking them when they use funny language, like the fact that they can't seem to call it by the anatomical term, so they use words like nippies and nip-nops
Or bonus holes.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's like some of them just it look as special, or dog ears. They're tiny dog ears though, and it's actually a good thing. I premiered one today called Tiny Dog Ears, and she's just the level of cope. It's just
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, the copium seems to be on short supply though, right? Like as the sort of like the zeitgeist shifts away from glorifying that. Like what like, you know, if we're like tasting the psychosphere about this topic, what's coming across for you?
that, you know, eventually there's not going to be that community there. Whether that's because you move on with your life, you move somewhere else, and you're just not in it anymore, or the youth move on, and therefore the culture moves on into some new like nightmare, and it's not related to the gender stuff. Like they are going to increasingly become targets of ridicule as this stops being popular, and it's gonna go from being like I was on the cutting edge of gender science and I was the cool kid to like, wow, grandma, you had your breasts removed. Why'd you have your breasts removed? That seems what? You thought you were a man, really? Like it's the current the party that never stops is going to stop eventually. It can only go on for so long. It can only be the cool thing to do for so long. And
Yeah.
when the friends aren't there anymore to tell you how great you look in your new outfit and your new skin and your new drug enhanced, you know, face, when it's not popular anymore because there's something new that's more popular, they're the ones who are going to be left with the scars and the pain and the dysfunction and the shame of being permanently marked as somebody that got conned into doing this, you know. So it's I feel like we already see that shift kind of happening.
Did you have that your own? Sorry, go ahead. Did you have your own experience with that? Because you I know you felt alienated, or felt this one, she really wants to eat soon.
It looks like she can go at least another 10 minutes.
Oh, she's fat as hell. She rolls the roost. I try really hard, but it's like so hard to keep her at that weight. It's all I can do.
I have a Maine Coon, and so he's got the same body size as your cat, but like he's also got like a tail and a head, a skull, and paws to match. So now when I see cats like that, I'm always like, why are the
she just loves the food.
So tiny.
And we moved somewhere where there's another cat, and he's a free eater, so I've had to stop him from free eating. And then it's just like he doesn't eat very much at all, and she eats everything. So it's like that really extreme version of like the skinny cat and the fat cat.
Oh, buddy. Like, I think she looks nice as a chunk.
I do too. It's more. I mean, I love her the way she looks, but I just I want her health to be good. I want her to be around for a long time, not just a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's
I think
fair.
She looks cute as a chunk. I'll meet your friend.
Yeah. She's getting up. I don't know.
Maine Coons are super intelligent, hey?
Yeah, he does tricks.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I've taught him some commands, and then he also, like, because I taught him that, I then taught him that shake will also be how he can ask for things. So he'll ask for things. He'll instead of like just going for food immediately, if he wants to, he'll come over and be like,
I could not resist that. Oh my God.
He'll also wake me up by pushing on me. He's like, oh, you wish you were a raccoon, don't you? You wish you had dexterous fingers. You'd be unstoppable.
Oh.
I bet if you had opposable thumbs. Can you imagine?
No, the world's not ready.
That would be bad. No. That's what's next. I feel like we're like transhumanism and like
Cat. I don't know where
animals.
Rupert went.
I mean, I might be okay with that if animals actually had more of a say.
Yeah.
This
Oh
is
my
JK
God, look
Rowling.
at me.
Oh,
She's a short hair. I don't know.
Oh, she.
I
Okay.
have to go find Rupert. I mean, she's part me because she's a sibling.
she's long
So
though.
she's
Yeah,
big.
she's
Yeah,
got
Yeah.
she's got big old paws.
She's not a regular tabby. I
Aw,
love her
she's
face.
cute.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, what a beauty.
Her skull's a bit indented. She had a
Oh.
incident before I got her, and so she can't bite or scratch because of the injury, and she
Oh,
makes
Oh yeah, you
buddy.
call her
sometimes.
J.K.
Growling.
Growling, right?
J.K. Rowling,
Her screen name
cute.
is J.K. Growling.
Oh my God.
She's got many names. Meow.
Yeah, that's what happens when you have a pet, right? I almost never, my cat's name is Ripley, but from the Alien franchise, Ellen Ripley.
Yeah.
But
Love
I almost never call her that. Like Mooney is her main name though. I call her Mooney a lot. I don't know why.
I have dogs. I'm that kind of same-sex attracted person.
You're
A
her
dog
parent.
person. Yeah. Let's hear.
But you, I know you have to leave soon because you have other stuff to go on today.
Yeah,
I do like to end these conversations with, on this particular channel with what you would say to someone to encourage them to speak out, that now is the time, if they might be too afraid to speak out, since you've been in this game for quite a while too. So
Yeah, a couple years now. Although it was interesting for especially near the beginning because people would have the sense that I'd been doing it for like far longer than I had been. And so people would be like, I've been
yeah,
watching
I
you for
thought
the
you'd
last
been
3
around.
years. They're like, no, you haven't. You have not. False. So I would just encourage people, when you speak out and you hear yourself speaking out, it new connections form in your brain and it becomes easier to keep speaking out. You don't feel as anxious as the first time when you started speaking up. You get experiences of reasoning and watching people either accept or reject your reasoning. So it's people try to make examples of people like me in order to scare you, but there are in fact many more of us than there are of them, and they are doing something that's the flawed and predatory is what how you can describe it, and or are people who are being victimized by a predatory social movement. And there's really high stakes for not speaking out. We have already lost a lot of ground in terms of lesbian and gay rights and bisexual rights and women's rights, and in the rights of children to grow up free of harmful chemicals, which is their human right. It's the right of a child to grow up free of harmful chemicals that they don't need. And when you're cosmetically modifying a child, that's not a medical need, that's a cosmetic interest. And so we've already gone very far down this very deranged path. And so there's no bottom to it. It will get worse and worse unless more and more people speak out. And the consequences for speaking out will get worse if more people don't speak out now. The sooner you speak out, the sooner we can stop the train. So I would just encourage people to speak out.
Yeah,
and,
amen to
you will
that.
grow as a person, and through the process, you will gain a respect for yourself in the process, and you will be able to help prevent some truly horrific outcomes for people that might not otherwise have heard anybody oppose it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
this was awesome. I really appreciate you agreeing to
thank you.
join us. Yeah, it means a lot.
Thanks so much for
thank you
hanging out
so
with
much.
us. You're amazing. And I'm so sorry I upset you earlier. I didn't.
When did you upset
you're
me?
so well. When I was like, I low key don't give a fuck or whatever. Like, the truth is
I just get
do.
emotional. It's not the first time I've gotten emotional on this particular
it's
topic.
good.
All right,
I'm really
I was an
glad.
interview for Generation Y where I got choked up too.
No, I'm really glad you
it's
do.
affected my family member, so it's like who's not hasn't didn't go down to some of the paths that we were talking about could be gone down. So I don't mean to imply anything about this person, but I have seen how somebody can change, and it not be their fault, and it not be fixable. And so it affects me to talk about it. But I do then generalize that to people who engage in even more problematic behavior than this particular person has ever engaged in, to my knowledge. So
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I think that sometimes we can get in our like the battle lines are drawn, and like we kind of line up behind them, and like there's no empathy extended to the other side. And yeah, I'm glad that you reminded us that yeah, sometimes fucked up shit happens to people, and they're like it's not through no fault of their own. They're just like
yeah,
pulled down this back alley into you know total horror. So yeah.
yeah. And so when we have we need as a society to plan for that, because it's going to keep happening. We can't eliminate all viruses yet, and we can't prevent people from getting concussions, or having other degenerative problems. And we just, if you love your family members and you want what's best for them, you want a society that prevents them from doing harmful things to themselves and others if that horrible outcome happens, and they're no longer in control of their behavior. That very much, I never forget that it could be any of us, and we all need to just, and people can sometimes come back from it, and sometimes they can't, but we need to have systems in place to respond to that without stigmatizing the people that are so affected.
Yeah.
Yeah, so say we all.
And it gives people, if you have that openness, it gives people the room to come back if they feel like
Yeah.
there's forgiveness there and understanding.
Yeah. And it's easier to come back if you were prevented from really harming anybody when you were in that state. A lot easier to come back, a lot easier to continue to be part of a functioning society. And it's just what I want for myself, if I'm ever like that, hopefully, God forbid, and what I would want for any loved one. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
yeah, thank you.